"You're incompetent, Dad. We're taking control of your assets." My son's words cut through the Christmas Eve air like a blade shattering the warmth I'd expected from family. Standing in my own living room, the house I'd built with my hands where I'd raised him where his mother had died, I watched Ryan and his wife deliver their perfectly rehearsed performance of false concern. They thought I was just another confused old man, easy prey for their desperate scheme. They saw my workshop full of antique clocks as junk, my life's passion, as an obstacle to their inheritance. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 50 years learning patience, precision, and the art of taking things apart piece by piece. They assumed the elderly watchmaker was powerless, but they were about to discover that the quietest gears often control the most devastating mechanisms. As I reached for my grandfather clock, my fingers found the hidden latch that would change everything, because some clocks are designed to strike when you least expect it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Now, let's return to that snowy Christmas Eve in Vermont. The grandfather clock chimed 7, its deep, resonant tone a familiar comfort that now felt like a warning bell. I hadn't actually opened the hidden drawer, not yet. That was a memory of what I could do, a vision of the final move in a game they had just started. For now, I simply stood, my hand resting on the polished wood of the clock my father had taught me to build. My gaze remained fixed on my son. Ryan stood by the fireplace, all slick confidence in his tailored suit, looking utterly out of place amongst the worn leather chairs and shelves of ticking heirlooms. His wife, Brooke, was perched on the arm of the sofa, a predatory stillness in her eyes. She held a wine glass like a weapon. "Don't be dramatic, Dad," Ryan scoffed, misreading my silence as weakness. "This is an intervention. We're worried about you." Worried. The word was a lie, thin and brittle. They were worried about the inheritance, about the money tied up in this house, a house I built, a house where I raised him, a house where his mother Eleanor had taken her last breath. Brooke leaned forward, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Victor, we saw the bills you forgot to pay last month. You're losing track. It's time for us to step in and manage things for you." She gestured vaguely at my workshop, visible through the doorway. "You can't just spend all your days tinkering with those old things." Tinkering. That's what she called my life's work, my art. I had repaired timepieces for presidents and farmers alike, each one a universe of delicate gears and patient hands. My hands, which were now curled into fists at my sides, I forced them to relax. Anger was a wild spring. It would uncoil too quickly. I needed the slow, deliberate torque of a mainspring, wound tight and released with precision. The bills were paid. "Brooke," I said quietly. I was merely waiting for a check to clear. Another lie. I had paid them the moment they arrived, as I always did. But I wanted to see how far they would push. "This isn't about bills," Ryan said, finally dropping the pretense. "This house is worth a fortune. It's wasted on one old man. We want to sell it. Find you a nice small apartment." There it was. The raw, unvarnished truth. They saw my home not as a legacy, but as a commodity. They saw me not as their father, but as an obstacle. They thought I was a broken old man, a relic like the clocks I fixed. They failed to understand one thing: a watchmaker knows that every gear, no matter how small, serves a purpose. And my plan had just started to tick. The front door clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. For a moment, the only movement in the room was the steady, rhythmic swing of a dozen pendulums, each marking time in its own voice. The house felt vast and empty, the warmth from the fireplace, unable to chase the chill their visit had left behind. I stood there for a long time, listening to the chorus of ticks and tocks that had been the soundtrack to my entire life. They weren't just machines to me. They were memories, each one a testament to a problem solved, a piece of history restored. My son saw them as junk. His wife saw them as clutter. They saw my life's passion as an inconvenience, standing in the way of their profit. My hand found the worn back of Eleanor's favorite armchair. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my fingers. I could almost see her there, curled up with a book, smiling at me over the rims of her glasses whenever a particularly stubborn gear finally clicked into place. We had built this life together, piece by piece, just as I built my clocks. We'd weathered storms, celebrated triumphs, and raised a son in these rooms. The thought of Ryan, her Ryan, standing where she once stood and spitting such venom, a fresh wave of grief and anger washed over me. "Oh, Eleanor," I whispered to the empty chair, "you wouldn't believe the man he's become. He had her eyes, but none of her warmth. He had my name, but none of my patience." When had the rot set in? Was it when he went to business school, learning that value was something you liquidate, not something you build? Or was it when he met Brooke, a woman who measured worth in square footage and brand names I walked into. My workshop, the scent of cedar and oil of familiar balm. Tools hung in their precise places on the wall. A half-finished mantel clock sat on my workbench, its intricate brass workings exposed. For years, I had poured everything I had into Ryan's future. I'd sold a prized collection of antique pocket watches to help with the down payment on his first home, the one he now deemed too small. I'd worked countless nights to pay for his education, believing I was investing in a good man. I picked up a small loupe, the magnifying glass I used for the most delicate work, and stared at the clock's escapement mechanism. It was the heart of the clock, the part that controls the release of power from the mainspring. My own mainspring of patience, of fatherly love, had been wound too tight for too long. Tonight they had pushed it to its breaking point, but I would not let it snap wildly. I would control the release. I would let the power out one calculated tick at a time. I was a craftsman, a planner. This was just another complex machine to be understood and, if necessary, disassembled. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. My expertise was in gears and springs, not legal loopholes and financial predation. I needed an expert of a different kind. I needed someone who understood numbers the way I understood time. My fingers found his number in my old leather-bound address book. Elias. He always hated leaving things unbalanced. My finger traced the faded ink next to his name, Elias Thorne. We'd known each other for 50 years, ever since he'd helped me set up the books for my first small workshop. He trusted craftsmanship and I trusted numbers. I dialed the phone, feeling heavy in my hand. It rang twice before he picked up. "You've reached Elias." His voice was as crisp and clear as it had been decades ago. "Merry Christmas, Victor. Merry Christmas, Elias," I replied, my own voice, sounding rougher than I intended. There was a pause. Elias missed nothing. "What's wrong?" he asked. All pleasantries gone. "You sound like you've just seen a ghost." "Worse," I said. "I've just seen my son." I explained everything, keeping my tone as level as I could. The ambush, the accusations of incompetence, the plan to sell my home. I laid out the facts like pieces of a broken clock on my workbench, cold hard and out of place. Elias listened without interruption. When I finished, the silence on the other end was heavy, not with sympathy, but with a simmering rage I knew well. "Vultures," he finally said the word, a quiet hiss. "They're circling because they think you're weak. They think I'm finished," I corrected him. "They think my time is up." "Then we'll have to reset the clock," he said, his tone shifting into the methodical calm I'd always relied on. "First things first, Victor. No more emotion. This is not a family dispute anymore. It's a hostile takeover attempt. You need to treat it as such." His words were a splash of cold water. He was right. My anger and grief were luxuries I couldn't afford. "What's my first move?" I asked. "Information," Elias stated plainly. "Greed is a hungry animal, Victor. It always needs to be fed. Ryan and that wife of his, they wouldn't be doing this unless they were desperate. They need money and they need it now. We need to find out why." How I asked, my mind already turning. "You live in that house. His old room is still there, isn't it? He's gotten careless. People like that always do. They assume you're too old or too stupid to notice." I thought of the mail he sometimes had delivered to my address, the way Brooke was always talking about her online businesses. "Look for anything," Elias instructed, his voice precise. "New credit card statements, late notices on car payments. Look at his wife's social media. People who crave wealth love to show it off, even when they can't afford it. Find the paper trail. It will lead us to their weakness." A sense of purpose began to replace the fog of despair. He had given me a target. He had given me a plan. It was no longer a vague emotional battle. It was a problem with variables, a mechanism to be understood. "I'll start tonight," I said. "Good," Elias replied. "Call me the second you find anything. And Victor, don't let them see you coming. The quietest tick is the one that signals the hour." After hanging up with Elias, I sat in the stillness of my workshop for a full minute, letting his logic settle over me. The emotional storm began to subside, replaced by the quiet focus of a craftsman with a new project. My house was no longer just a home. It was a field of evidence, and I knew exactly where to start digging. I flicked on the hallway light and climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. Ryan's old bedroom was at the far end, a place I rarely entered. It had become a sort of family attic, a repository for the life he'd left behind. The air inside was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. A beam of light from the hallway cut across the floor, illuminating a landscape of cardboard boxes and forgotten furniture. I didn't bother with the light switch. I preferred the shadows. I moved through the room like a ghost, my fingers tracing the outline of a dusty baseball trophy on his old desk. I remembered the day he'd won it, his face bright with a pride so pure it hurt to recall that. Beside it was a framed photo of him and me, taken on a fishing trip when he was 10. He was holding up a small trout, his grin wide and gap-toothed. Where did that boy go? When did his open-handed joy curdle into this tight-fisted greed? I pushed the thought away. Nostalgia was a trap, a diversion from the task at hand. Elias was right. Emotion was a liability. Ryan used this room for overflow things he couldn't fit into his own meticulously modern house. Tucked in the corner behind an old armchair were 3 newer-looking boxes labeled taxes and misc. My heart gave a slight hopeful flutter. Careless. Just as Elias predicted. I knelt the floorboards, groaning under my weight, and pulled the box marked misc towards me. It was a jumble of old tech gadgets, tangled charging cords, and stacks of mail he'd apparently never bothered to sort through. Most of it was junk mail catalogs for things he couldn't afford and pretended he could. But then I saw it. Tucked between a Pottery Barn catalog and an alumni magazine was a thick windowed envelope from a credit card company I didn't recognize. It wasn't addressed to my house, but to his. He must have brought a stack of mail with him on a previous visit and simply dumped it here. My fingers, usually steady enough to handle the tiniest of watch gears, trembled slightly as I slid the statement out. It wasn't sealed. He hadn't even bothered to open it. The summary on the first page was all I needed to see. The balance was staggering, nearly 5 times the limit of any card I'd ever owned. Below it was a bright red box, account past due. Minimum payment required. The list of charges was a roadmap of their desperation-lavish dinners, designer clothes, a spa weekend for Brooke. They weren't living, they were performing. And they were funding the performance with debt. Elias was right. The trail had begun. And this was just the first stone. I left the credit card statement on Ryan's dusty desk, a single white rectangle of truth in a room full of forgotten memories. Elias had given me a second directive: social media. The thought felt foreign to me. My life was tangible, built of wood, brass, and steel. Theirs, it seemed, was built of light and shadows on a screen. I went downstairs and picked up the tablet Eleanor had bought me a few years back, a device I mostly used to read the news and look up antique clock parts. My fingers felt clumsy on the glass screen as I typed Brooke's name into the search bar. Her profile was public, of course. An audience was essential for her brand. The page that loaded was a spectacle of calculated perfection. It was a life curated for envy. There was Brooke smiling in a designer dress at a restaurant where the appetizers cost more than my weekly groceries. There was Ryan raising a champagne flute on a rented boat, the caption reading number, entrepreneur life, number, building our empire. There were pictures of lavish vacations. I knew for a fact they couldn't afford each one plastered with hashtags like number blessed and number living the dream. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I thought of the red past due stamp on the statement upstairs. They weren't living a dream. They were living a lie, and they were trying to make me pay for it. I scrolled methodically, not as a father, but as an investigator. I ignored the smiling faces and focused on the details in the background, the dates, the locations. I was looking for a pattern, a crack in the facade. And then I found it. Starting about 6 months ago, a new hashtag began to appear in her posts, number TechWife. She started tagging a company called Innovate Futures in photos of Ryan. One post showed him standing in front of a sleek glass-walled office, the caption gushing about his vision and leadership. Brooke was not just showing off. She was marketing. She was building a narrative of success around my son. My fingers, now moving with more purpose, opened a new tab. I typed Innovate Futures into the search engine. I didn't need to dig deep. The first page of results told the entire story. Innovate Futures fails to secure second round of funding, read one headline from a local business journal. Another from a month ago, local tech startup announces major layoffs. The final article was a dagger to the heart. It detailed how the company's initial seed money, largely from private family investors, had been exhausted with little to show for it. It all clicked into place, the gears of their scheme locking together with horrifying clarity. The champagne, the boat, the designer clothes, it was all a desperate performance to lure in new investors, to project an image of success that didn't exist. Ryan's empire was a house of cards, and a strong wind was blowing. They weren't just greedy. They weren't just entitled. They were on the edge of a cliff, and they were planning to pull me down with them to break their fall. The name burned on the screen. Innovate Futures. It sounded so hopeful, so full of the promise that had once defined my son. Now it just sounded like a lie. The business articles gave me the what, but Elias needed the how. The money had to come from somewhere. The article had mentioned private family investors. A cold dread heavier than any I had felt, yet settled in my stomach. I pushed myself up from the table and climbed the stairs back to the chill of Ryan's old room. This time I had a specific target. I wasn't just looking for debt. I was looking for victims. I ignored the box marked MISC and went for the one labeled taxes. It was a more organized mess, full of old receipts and tax forms. But underneath a stack of returns from 5 years ago, my fingers brushed against a sleek dark blue folder. It was completely out of place. The logo of Innovate Futures was embossed in silver on the cover. My breath caught. I carried it over to the desk, clearing a space next to the baseball trophy, and opened it under the dim light. It was a prospectus full of glossy charts and technical jargon designed to impress and confuse. And tucked inside were copies of investor agreements. My eyes scanned the names. The first one made me nauseous. Margaret Peterson, our neighbor for 30 years, a widow who trusted me implicitly. She had invested $10,000. The next was Jim Carter, the man who owned the local hardware store. $20,000. These were not wealthy venture capitalists. These were good, hard-working people from our town, people who had watched Ryan grow up. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had used my good name, my reputation as collateral to fleece our friends. The scope of his deception was breathtaking, but the worst was yet to come. At the very back of the folder was a single unsigned agreement. It was a boilerplate contract identical to the others except for the name of the investor and the amount. The name was mine, Victor Caldwell. The amount was $250,000. It was nearly the entire value of my liquid savings, the nest egg Eleanor and I had carefully built over a lifetime. He had planned to approach me. He had planned to drain me dry. And then I saw the paper tucked behind it. It was a single sheet covered in my name, written over and over again in his handwriting. Victor Caldwell. Victor Caldwell. Victor Caldwell. Some were close. Some were clumsy. He had been practicing my signature. He hadn't just planned to ask. He had planned to steal. The accusation of incompetence, the talk of managing my affairs, it was all a prelude to forgery, a way to explain the sudden disappearance of my life savings. I sank into the dusty chair, the papers shaking in my hand. This was not about a house. This was grand larceny dressed up in family concern. I pulled out my phone. Elias picked up on the first ring. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice sharp. "He wasn't just planning to push me out, Elias," I said, my voice low and hard. "He was practicing my signature." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It wasn't the silence of thought, but of shock. I could picture Elias in his study, sitting ramrod straight in his leather chair, his mind processing the new horrifying variable I had just introduced. The practice sheet. The forgery. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of all warmth, leaving only cold, hard steel. "He crossed the line, Victor. This is no longer a family squabble over an inheritance. This is a felony." The word hung in the air between us. Felony. "What do I do, Elias?" I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. The weight of it all was threatening to crush me. "You listen to me, and you do exactly as I say," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "First, get your tablet. Take clear, well-lit photographs of every single page in that folder. The investor lists the unsigned contract with your name on it, and especially that practice sheet. When you're done, email them to me and then to yourself. We need a digital record immediately, in case those papers disappear." I moved without thinking, my body responding to the certainty in his voice. I laid the papers out on the desk and did as he instructed, the flash from the tablet camera, feeling like small bursts of lightning in the dim room. "Done," I said after a few minutes. "Good," he continued, his pace quickening. "Second, you are not to speak to Ryan or Brooke again. Not a word. No calls, no texts. If they show up at your door, you don't answer. From this moment on, all communication goes through a lawyer." "You're a lawyer," I pointed out. "I'm a retired accountant who knows the law," he corrected sharply. "You need a bulldog, a real litigator. First thing tomorrow morning, I don't care that it's Christmas Day, you are calling a man named Marcus Thorne. No relation. He's the best probate lawyer in the state, and he owes me a favor. I'll text you his number." "All right, Marcus Thorne," I repeated, scribbling the name on a notepad. "And third, Victor, this is the most crucial step. We need to build a fortress around you and that house, and we need to do it now. The forgery attempt proves Ryan is willing to commit a crime to get what he wants. We cannot give him any openings. How do we do that? An irrevocable trust, Elias said. We transfer ownership of the house and your primary assets into a trust that you control, but that legally separates them from you as an individual. Once they're in there, he can't touch them. No lawsuit, no declaration of incompetence, nothing can get through it. It's an iron wall. I felt a flicker of hope, the first I'd felt all night. A wall. That was something a builder like me could understand. Marcus will handle the details, but you need to be ready. This is war, Victor. There's no turning back now. I know, I said, my voice no longer trembling. It was steady, resolute. Thank you, Elias. Don't thank me yet, he said. Just follow the plan. I hung up the phone and looked at the papers spread across my desk. They were no longer just symbols of betrayal. They were ammunition. The time for defense was over. The time to build my fortress had begun. Christmas morning arrived not with carols, but with a cold gray dawn. I had not slept. Instead, I had sat in my workshop, the folder of evidence on the bench beside me, letting the steady ticking of the clocks anchor me. The anger from the night before had cooled, leaving behind a hard, clear resolve. At precisely 8 o'clock, I dialed the number Elias had sent me. I expected a voicemail, a holiday greeting. Instead, a man with a voice like gravel answered on the second ring. Thorne, Mr. Thorne, I began. My name is Victor Caldwell. Elias Thorne suggested I call you. There was a brief pause. Elias, he grunted. That old numbers wizard is still kicking, huh? He said you'd call. What's the emergency? I explained the situation as concisely as I could, just the facts, as Elias had coached me. The house, the accusations, the forgery attempt. He listened, his silence punctuated only by an occasional grunt of acknowledgement. I see, he said when I was done. Standard vulture tactics. Desperate son, greedy daughter-in-law. Get the evidence Elias told you to gather and be in my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And Victor, do not, under any circumstances, speak to your son. The line went dead. The entire call lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like I had just hired an army. My newfound sense of control was short-lived. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister Clara, who lived 2 states away. Victor, are you okay? Brooke just called me. She said you had a fall and are very confused. Why didn't you tell me? My fingers tightened on the phone. So it begins. The campaign to paint me as a frail, senile old man had started. I typed a simple reply. I am fine, Clara. We will talk soon. I knew anything more would just add fuel to the fire Brooke was so eagerly stoking. The real attack came just before noon. A uniformed courier knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope, his expression carefully neutral. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The return address was from the county courthouse. I closed the door and slit the envelope open with a letter opener. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was clear. Ryan Caldwell and Brooke Caldwell had filed a petition for an emergency guardianship hearing. They claimed I was a danger to myself and my own financial well-being. Attached were sworn statements from them, full of half-truths and outright lies about my erratic behavior and memory lapses. They were moving faster than I had anticipated. They were trying to create a narrative to frame me as incompetent before I even had a chance to fight back. They thought they were laying a siege. They had no idea I was already outside the walls building a cannon. I picked up the thick legal document. This wasn't a threat. It was a gift. It was their entire strategy laid out on paper, signed with their own arrogant hands, and they had just delivered it right to my door. Marcus Thorne's office was nothing like my workshop. Where I had the scent of wood and oil, he had the smell of old leather and power. The walls were lined with law books, their spines forming a silent, intimidating army. Thorne himself sat behind a mahogany desk the size of a small boat. He was a broad, solid man with a square jaw and eyes that didn't just look at you, they assessed you. He didn't stand or offer a handshake. Sit, he grunted, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Elias said you had paper. Let's see it. I placed the folder on his desk and sat down. Wordlessly, I laid out the evidence in the order I had found it. The credit card statement. The printouts of Brooke's social media posts. The prospectus for Innovate Futures. The list of local investors my son had swindled. And last, the unsigned contract and the sheet of my practiced forged signatures. He examined each document with a focused intensity, his face betraying no emotion. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the distant ticking of a carriage clock on his mantelpiece. If you're enjoying Victor's methodical pursuit of justice, let us know by hitting that like button. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to you. Now let's see what the bulldog had to say. Thorne pushed the papers into a neat stack and leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto mine. "This isn't a case, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a public execution, and your son has handed us the axe." He picked up the guardianship petition they had served me. "This was a mistake. A big one. By filing this, they have officially put your mental and financial state into question before a judge. They think it's their stage. We're going to make it ours." "What do you mean?" I asked. "We don't fight the hearing," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "We welcome it. We walk into that courtroom and we agree that your finances should be examined. And then we present every piece of paper you just gave me as evidence of a coordinated conspiracy to defraud an elderly person. We use their own petition as a platform to expose their crimes. The audacity of it was brilliant. They had built a trap and Thorne was planning to lock them inside it. "What about the house?" I asked. "The trust. My assistant is drafting the paperwork for an irrevocable trust. As we speak," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We'll have it filed by the end of the day. By the time they get to court, that house will be more secure than Fort Knox. Their primary objective will be off the table before the hearing even begins." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "They've painted you as a confused old man. We're going to paint them as predatory financial criminals. And we have the receipts to prove it." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a bulldog on my side. "So what's our first move?" I asked. Thorne's smile widened. "They filed for guardianship. We're going to file for a restraining order." I walked out of Thorne's office into the cold afternoon air, feeling like a different man. The weight of uncertainty had been replaced by the solid heft of a plan. The fortress Elias had spoken of was no longer just an idea. Its foundations were being laid. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop, the familiar tasks of cleaning and oiling a complex clock movement calming my nerves. I was organizing my world piece by piece, while Thorne was organizing the legal assault. At 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Thorne. "Papers served. Trust filed. The wall is up." 30 minutes later, my phone began to ring. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. I looked at it, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Thorne's voice echoed in my mind. "Do not, under any circumstances, speak to your son." I silenced the call and placed the phone face down on the workbench. It immediately rang again. I silenced it again. A moment later, a notification appeared. Voicemail. I listened, my thumb hovering over the delete button. "Dad, what the hell is this?" Ryan's voice was a torrent of disbelief and fury. "A restraining order? Are you insane? Some guy just showed up at our door and handed us papers. You can't do this. Call me back." Right now, I deleted the message. The phone rang again. Brooke, this time. I ignored it. Another voicemail notification, then a barrage of text messages, a chaotic mix of threats, pleas, and accusations. "You've lost your mind. Brooke is crying. Are you happy? You're going to regret this, old man. Dad, please. This is a misunderstanding." The messages painted a picture of two predators who had suddenly found themselves in a cage they thought they were building for someone else. Their confidence had shattered, replaced by raw, ugly panic. They had assumed I would be a passive victim, a feeble old man who would crumble under pressure. They had never considered that I might fight back, let alone that I would strike first. The phone rang again, Ryan's name flashing for the 5th time. I watched it vibrate on the scarred wood of my bench, the buzzing, a frantic, desperate sound. For a moment, a pang of something pity, perhaps a ghost of fatherly instinct, twisted in my gut. He was my son, and he was in pain. But then I looked at the folder of evidence, at the practiced forgeries, and the names of the friends he had betrayed. The feeling vanished, replaced by a cold certainty. This was not pain. It was the shriek of a cornered animal. This was the consequence of his own choices, a reckoning he had brought upon himself. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail one last time. I did not listen to the message. I turned the ringer off completely, plunging my workshop into a blessed, peaceful silence, punctuated only by the calm, steady ticking of the clocks. The first battle was over, and I had won. The days that followed were quiet. The frantic calls and angry texts ceased, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. It was the calm of a mainspring wound to its absolute limit just before the release. I did not waste this time. Under Thorne's guidance, I prepared for the hearing with the same meticulous care I would give to restoring a priceless antique clock. Every piece of evidence was a gear, every document a spring. They had to be cleaned, polished, and assembled in the correct sequence for the machine of justice to work. I organized the bank statements, the printouts of Brooks' extravagant posts, and the damning articles about Innovate Futures into a precise, undeniable timeline of their deceit. I met with Thorne twice more in his fortress of an office. He went over my testimony with me, coaching me to stick to the facts, to present my case not as a wounded father, but as a competent man defending his life's work against a calculated attack. They will try to make you angry, he warned, his eyes narrowed. They will call you confused, forgetful. You will not rise to the bait. You will be calm. You will be precise. You will be a watchmaker. He reviewed the evidence I had collected, nodding slowly. This is good, he grunted. The forgery sheet is our kill shot, but we hold it in reserve. We let them walk into the trap first. His strategy was simple and brutal. We would let them tell their story, let them lie under oath, building their case against me brick by fraudulent brick. We would let them present their narrative of the senile old man who couldn't manage his own affairs. And then at the moment they felt most secure, Thorne would begin to disassemble their story piece by piece, using their own words and our evidence to expose them. Is there anything else? Thorne asked during our final meeting, his gaze sweeping over the files. Any final piece. The one thing they could never anticipate. I thought for a moment, my mind going to the heart of my home, the grandfather clock in the living room. There is, I said slowly. My wife Eleanor was a very perceptive woman. She worried about Ryan's tendencies long before I was willing to see them. I explained about the irrevocable trust established years ago, and the letter she had written and sealed away with it. A letter to be read only in the event that Ryan ever challenged my right to my own home. It was a failsafe, a final gear designed to engage only in a catastrophic failure. Thorne listened, a rare glint of admiration in his eyes. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. A voice from the grave, he murmured. They'll never see it coming. Bring the letter, but we only use it if we have to. It's the last tick of the clock. I left his office feeling a strange sense of peace. The trap was set. The evidence was calibrated. All the pieces were in place. All I had to do now was wait for the hearing. The courtroom was a cold, impersonal space, all dark wood and muted light. It smelled of floor polish and anxiety. I sat beside Thorne at the respondent's table, my hands resting flat on the smooth, cool surface. I felt a strange calm, the detached focus of a craftsman observing a complex mechanism. Across the room, Ryan and Brooke sat with their lawyer, a young man with an overly slick haircut and a confident smirk. Brooke was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, a perfect portrait of a concerned daughter-in-law. Ryan looked solemn, his shoulders slumped, playing the part of the burdened son. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, entered, and the proceedings began. Ryan's lawyer, Mr. Hayes, started first. He painted a picture of me with broad, sad strokes. He spoke of my increasing isolation since Eleanor's death, my eccentric obsession with my clocks, and a few carefully twisted anecdotes about my supposed forgetfulness. It was a masterful performance of half-truths. We are not here to punish Mr. Caldwell Hayes, concluded, his voice dripping with false sincerity. We are here to protect him, to protect his legacy from his own declining faculties. Then he called his first witness my son. Ryan walked to the stand, his face a mask of sorrow. He looked directly at me, his eyes pleading, as if we were the only two people in the room. It was a sickeningly good performance. Mr. Caldwell Hayes began gently, can you tell the court why you felt this petition was necessary? It was the hardest decision of my life, Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. I love my father, but I can't stand by and watch him fade away. He forgets things, important things. He left the stove on last month. He's been sending money to telemarketers. The house is falling into disrepair. He paused, taking a shaky breath. And his finances. He doesn't understand the modern world. He's vulnerable. Brooke and I are terrified that someone will take advantage of him. Every word was a lie. I had never left the stove on. The telemarketers were my monthly donations to the local historical society. The house was in perfect repair because I maintained it myself. Thorne sat beside me motionless as a statue, his pen occasionally scratching a note on a legal pad. He had warned me this would happen. He had told me to let the lies build. But hearing them spoken aloud under oath in this solemn room was like swallowing shards of glass. My hands curled into fists under the table. And what are your intentions should the court grant you guardianship? Hayes asked. We just want to make sure he's safe, Ryan said, his voice breaking. We'd sell the house, yes, but only to move him into a modern safe facility where he can be looked after. We'd manage his finances to ensure his future is secure. He looked at the judge, his performance reaching its peak. This isn't about money. It's about protecting the man who gave me everything. The lie was so profound, so complete, that it was almost beautiful in its audacity. He finished his testimony. The room was silent. Judge Miller looked at me with an expression of pity. The trap was working perfectly. They had no idea it was for them. Mr. Thorne, your witness, Judge Miller, said, her gaze shifting to our table. Thorne rose slowly, a formidable presence. He didn't approach the witness stand with aggression, but with a quiet, deliberate calm. He clasped his hands behind his back and nodded slightly at Ryan. Mr. Caldwell, he began, his voice a polite, low rumble. Thank you for your testimony. It's clear you care deeply for your father. Of course I do, Ryan said, relaxing slightly. This was not the attack he had expected. You mentioned your father's finances are in disarray, that he is vulnerable. Is that correct? Yes, that's right, Ryan affirmed, nodding earnestly. He's from a different generation. He doesn't understand the risks. I see, Thorne said, picking up a single sheet of paper from his table. And in your opinion, what would be an example of a poor financial decision for a man his age? Ryan hesitated for a second. Well, risky investments, for one. Things that aren't stable. Things like, say, a tech startup, Thorne asked, his voice still gentle. A flicker of unease crossed Ryan's face. Yes, exactly. Something like that would be very unwise. Thorne walked slowly towards the stand and placed the paper in front of my son. Could you identify this document for the court, mister? Caldwell Ryan looked down. His confident posture stiffened. It was a printout of Brooks' Instagram post, the one of him standing in front of the Innovate Futures office. It's a social media post, he stammered. Indeed, Thorne said. And in it your wife describes you as the visionary leader of this company. Is Innovate Futures a stable, secure investment? Objection, Ryan's lawyer shot to his feet. Relevance. It speaks directly to the witness's judgment regarding financial matters, Your Honor, Thorne replied smoothly. Overruled, the judge said, her eyes now fixed on Ryan with a new curiosity. Answer the question, Mr. Caldwell. It's a startup, Ryan admitted, his voice tight. There's always some risk. And is it true, Thorne continued, his voice hardening slightly, that Innovate Futures recently failed to secure funding and has laid off most of its staff? We're restructuring, Ryan said, avoiding eye contact. Is it also true that you and your wife have accumulated over $70,000 in unsecured credit card debt? Thorne pressed, dropping a copy of the statement onto the railing in front of Ryan. Ryan's face went pale. That's a private matter. Sir, you have made your father's private finances the subject of this hearing. I am merely establishing a baseline for sound financial judgment. Would you consider this? Thorne tapped the credit card statement to be sound judgment. Ryan was silent. His carefully constructed image of the responsible son was beginning to crack. The confident performer was gone, replaced by a man squirming under a spotlight he had created himself. Thorne wasn't shouting. He wasn't accusing. He was simply disassembling Ryan's credibility gear by gear with cold, hard facts. And he was just getting started. Ryan was visibly flustered, his carefully crafted composure gone. He kept glancing at his lawyer, who could only offer a helpless shrug. The foundation of their case was crumbling, and Thorne hadn't even brought out the heavy tools yet. Thorne let the silence hang for a moment, letting Ryan's discomfort soak into the courtroom air. Then he walked back to his table and picked up the dark blue folder from Innovate Futures. Mr. Caldwell, Thorne said, his voice now devoid of its earlier politeness. Let's return to your business. You stated you received funding from private family investors. Is that correct? Yes, Ryan said, his voice barely audible. Could you name some of these investors for the court? Objection, Hayes said weakly. Harassment. Your Honor, Thorne countered, this petition is based on my client's alleged financial incompetence. It is vital to examine the petitioner's own financial dealings, especially when they involve members of my client's community. I'll allow it, the judge said, her eyes narrowed. Proceed, Mr. Thorne. Thorne opened the folder. Margaret Peterson, a widow. She invested her late husband's pension, $10,000. Jim Carter from the local hardware store, $20,000. Does this sound right, Mr. Caldwell? Ryan stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't answer. Did you inform these investors, your father's friends and neighbors, that your company was on the verge of collapse when you took their money? Thorne's voice was like cracking ice. No, Ryan whispered. I thought we could turn it around. So you defrauded them, Thorne stated flatly. Objection, sustained, the judge said. Rephrase, Mr. Thorne. My apologies, Your Honor, Thorne said, though he didn't sound apologetic at all. He pulled the final 2 sheets of paper from the folder. One final matter, Mr. Caldwell. Is this your handwriting? He placed the practice sheet in front of Ryan, the page filled with my forged signature. Ryan's eyes widened in sheer terror. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. I don't know what that is. You don't, Thorne said, feigning surprise. It appears to be a practice sheet for forging your father's signature. And this he placed the unsigned contract. Beside it is an investor agreement for $250,000 from your father's savings, which you intended to sign yourself. Isn't that right? The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Ryan's face was ashen. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his wife, whose own face was a mask of horror. He looked at his lawyer, who was staring down at his legal pad, as if hoping it would swallow him whole. There was nowhere left to run. Isn't it true, mister? Caldwell Thorne's voice boomed, filling the silence that this entire guardianship hearing was a sham. A pretext to have your father declared incompetent so you could forge his signature and steal his life savings to cover your own. Catastrophic failures. Ryan slumped in the witness chair, his body seeming to deflate. He buried his face in his hands. The disassembly was complete. All the gears and springs of his deceit lay scattered on the courtroom floor for everyone to see. The silence in the courtroom was a physical weight. It pressed down on all of us, thick and suffocating. Ryan's muffled sobs were the only sound, a pathetic end to his grand performance. Brooke sat frozen at their table, her face a blank mask of shock, the crocodile tears long forgotten. Her carefully constructed digital world had just collided with cold, hard reality. Judge Miller stared down at my son for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she removed her glasses, polishing them slowly with a cloth. It was the only movement in the room. When she put them back on, her eyes were like chips of flint. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. Do you have any further questions for your client? Ryan's lawyer, who looked as though he'd been struck by lightning, rose shakily to his feet. No, Your Honor. The petitioner rests. It was a surrender. A complete and utter capitulation. I should think so, the judge said dryly. She turned her gaze to Thorne. Mr. Thorne, do you wish to call any witnesses? Perhaps your client. Thorne stood. Your Honor, given the evidence presented and the witness's complete breakdown, we feel our position is clear. We do not need to trouble the court further. We rest as well. Judge Miller nodded, her eyes sweeping across the room before landing on the evidence Thorne had submitted. I have heard the testimony and reviewed the documents, she began, her voice gaining power. The petition for guardianship is not only denied, it is dismissed with extreme prejudice. This court finds the petition to be frivolous, malicious, and filed in bad faith. She looked directly at Ryan and Brooke, and for the first time I saw a flicker of raw anger in her eyes. You have come into this courtroom and wasted its time with a transparent and despicable scheme to defraud your own father. You have used his age as a weapon and his love as a vulnerability. It is among the most shameful abuses of the legal process I have seen in my 15 years on the bench. She wasn't finished. The evidence submitted by the respondent suggests not just a family dispute, but potential criminal activity, including fraud and conspiracy. I am therefore referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for a full investigation. A collective gasp went through the small gallery. Brooke's hands flew to her mouth. This was no longer about a house. This was about their freedom. Furthermore, the judge continued, the temporary restraining order filed by Mr. Caldwell is hereby made permanent. You are to have no contact with your father, direct or indirect. This hearing is adjourned. With a final sharp rap of her gavel, it was over. The sound echoed in the silent room, a definitive final tick of a clock, marking the end of an era. My era of fear was over. Their era of consequences had just begun. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut behind us, muffling the chaotic scene we left behind. Ryan and Brooke were huddled with their lawyer, their faces a mixture of disbelief and terror. I didn't look back. Thorne walked beside me down the long marble hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The adrenaline of the battle was fading, leaving a hollow, aching void in its place. I had won. The word felt strange, ill-fitting. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. Well done, Mr. Caldwell, Thorne said as we reached the courthouse steps. The cold winter air hit my face, a welcome shock. You stayed calm. You let him hang himself. You gave him the rope, I replied, my voice hoarse. He gave a rare, almost imperceptible nod. The district attorney's office will be in touch. They'll need your testimony again. But the fight for your home is over. He shook my hand, his grip firm and final. You built a strong case, Victor. Now go home and rest. He turned and walked away, a solid, reassuring figure disappearing into the midday crowd. I stood on the steps alone, watching the traffic flow past a river of strangers, oblivious to the war I had just survived. I should have felt relief. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. I had protected my home. I had defended my name. But I had lost my son. Perhaps I had lost him long ago, and this was just the formal burial. I drove home not to the triumphant sounds of a victor, but to the quiet hum of the engine. The familiar route seemed different, the trees starker against the gray sky. When I walked back into my house, the silence was different from the night before. It was no longer tense and waiting. It was simply empty. The grandfather clock chimed the hour, its familiar steady voice the only one to greet me. I walked into my workshop and ran my hand over the smooth, unfinished wood of the mantel clock on my bench. I had spent a lifetime creating order from chaos, assembling tiny, disparate parts into a whole that was beautiful and precise. My own family, however, had fractured into pieces I could never reassemble. The victory in court was a public fact. The loss in my heart was a private truth. I had saved the physical structure of my life, but the foundation of it, my family, was rubble. I thought of the boy with the gap-toothed grin holding up a fish. I thought of the young man at his graduation, full of promises. Where had it all gone so wrong? Was there a moment, a single tick of the clock where I could have intervened and changed the entire mechanism? I didn't know. Perhaps some clocks were simply destined to break. I sat on my stool, the scent of cedar and oil surrounding me like a shroud. The work was done. The battle was won. So why did it feel so much like grief? I sat in my workshop for hours as the afternoon light faded, turning the sawdust on the floor to gold, then gray. The grief was a heavy cloak, and I didn't have the strength to shrug it off. My eyes drifted from the workbench to the living room to the tall, silent form of the grandfather clock, the fail-safe, the final gear Thorne and I had held in reserve. I hadn't needed it in court, but suddenly I needed it now, for myself. I rose, my joints stiff, and walked to the clock. My fingers, guided by memory, found the hidden latch. I performed the sequence, a series of clicks and turns that only I knew. The secret compartment slid open with a soft whisper of wood on wood. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was the thick envelope with my name on it, written in Eleanor's elegant, familiar script. My hands trembled as I took it out. It had been years since I'd seen her handwriting. I sat in her favorite armchair, the one I had sat in the night this all began, and carefully broke the wax seal. The letter inside was written on her favorite cream-colored stationery. Her voice, clear and loving, rose from the page. "My dearest Victor," it began, "if you are reading this, it means my deepest fear has come to pass. It means our son has let the shadows in his heart consume the light we tried so hard to nurture. Please know, my love, that this is not your failure. You cannot wind a clock that is determined to run backwards." I paused, a lump forming in my throat. She had seen it. All those years ago, she had seen the potential for this darkness, even when I had been blind to it. I continued reading. "I know you are hurting. I know you feel you have lost a part of yourself. But the legacy we built is not in our bloodline, but in the love and integrity with which we lived. This house is not just wood and nails. It is a testament to that love. The clocks you build are not just gears and springs. They are proof that patience and precision can create something that endures. That is your legacy. That is what you must protect. Do not let his choices poison your heart. You have spent your life fixing things, my dear husband, but Ryan is not a broken clock you can mend. He must find his own way back to the light if he so chooses. Your task now is not to fix him, but to heal yourself. Forgive him not for his sake, but for yours. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door to your own peace. Live in our home. Fill it with the quiet ticking of your craft. Find joy in the small, precise moments that have always brought you peace. My love for you endures beyond time itself." I folded the letter, holding it to my chest. The tears I had held back for so long finally came silent and cleansing. They were not tears of grief for what I had lost, but tears of gratitude for what I had been given. Eleanor had left me a map, a guide out of the darkness. My work was not over. A new project had just begun, the careful, patient work of healing. Months passed. The harsh winter gave way to a gentle Vermont spring. The snow melted, revealing the green shoots of new life in my garden. The district attorney's office had indeed pressed charges against Ryan and Brooke for fraud. I was required to give a final testimony, a simple statement of facts which I delivered calmly, just as Thorne had coached me. I did not stay to hear the verdict. It was their story now, not mine. I had my own work to do. Following Eleanor's words, I poured my energy not into bitterness, but into my craft. The mantel clock on my workbench, the one I had started before the chaos, was finally complete. It was not my most intricate work, but it was my most honest. Every gear was placed with a newfound sense of purpose. Every tick was a beat of my own peaceful heart. It was a clock born not of grief, but of healing. I didn't sell it. I placed it on the mantelpiece in the living room, right where Eleanor would have wanted it. Its soft, steady chime was a reminder that time, no matter how broken, could be made whole again. My life found a new, quieter rhythm. I reconnected with my sister Clara, and we spoke often, mending the bridge my son had tried to burn. I had lunch with the friends Ryan had wronged, not to speak of his betrayal, but to reaffirm the bonds of community that he had tried to sever. I didn't tell them I had used a portion of my savings to anonymously repay the money they had lost. It wasn't about clearing his name, but about restoring their faith. One sunny afternoon, I sat on my porch, a glass of iced tea in my hand, watching a young family walk by. The parents were pointing out the details of my old house to their small daughter. They smiled and waved. I smiled and waved back. The house was no longer a fortress to be defended. It was simply a home filled with the quiet ticking of my craft and the enduring warmth of my wife's love. I had learned that a legacy isn't something you leave behind in a will. It's something you build every day in the quiet integrity of your own heart. The mainspring of my anger had unwound, leaving not emptiness but a gentle, lasting peace. What a journey we've shared today. Stories like Victor's remind us that true strength is not the absence of pain, but the wisdom to heal from it. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.